Snow drifts softly against the timbered walls, a faint glow of firelight flickers across carved beams, and within the longhouse voices murmur low, stories, laughter, and the quiet rhythm of life unfolding in the far north. Tonight, we step gently into their world. Welcome, dear listener, to this quiet journey through history. Together we'll wander through Viking longhouses, exploring not only how families ate, worked, and slept beneath one roof, but also the little secrets of daily life. Rituals at the hearth, children's playful tasks, even the surprising ways they kept warm through endless winters. It's a story of resilience and tenderness, of community and survival, and perhaps you'll discover details you've never imagined before. If you'd like more calm journeys like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe or leave a gentle like. It's never required, only if it feels right. And before we begin, share with me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Long ago, in the misty reaches of Scandinavia, where the sea met the sky in endless shades of grey, and the winds carried whispers of ancient tales, there existed homes that were more than mere shelters. These were the Viking longhouses, grand, elongated structures made of timber and thatch, reaching like wooden arms across the frozen earth. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed simple, practical, even austere. Yet to the Vikings, each longhouse was a living testament, a declaration of endurance, identity, and survival. Every log and beam was carefully selected and shaped. Some were so sturdy that the houses could withstand heavy snowfall and relentless storms, while others bore carvings or markings, small symbols of luck, protection, or pride in the family who called this place home. Imagine the artisans hammering and chiselling, humming soft tunes as they worked, perhaps slipping a sly joke or two about the neighbour's chicken that kept escaping into the construction site. Even in labour there was a rhythm, a poetry to their effort, a quiet joy in creating a space that would cradle generations. These longhouses were more than architecture. They were the heartbeat of the Viking clan. Unlike modern homes, which are often designed for comfort or aesthetic appeal, a longhouse was designed for life itself, accommodating humans, animals, and the tools of daily survival under a single roof. Inside, the central hearth smoked gently, filling the space with warmth, the aroma of roasted meats, and the faint scent of pine and oak from the timbers. This hearth was the centre of existence, a place where stories were told, meals were shared, and important decisions were made. In the glow of its fire, the clan gathered not only for warmth but for unity, to reinforce bonds that were as vital as the very beams holding up the roof. Longhouses also reflected the social and economic structure of Viking society. The larger and more elaborately built a house, the more prosperous and respected the family. It was a subtle display of wealth, skill and reputation, though never ostentatious. A visitor might note the longhouse's size, admire the symmetry of the timberwork, or chuckle quietly at a crooked beam, perhaps a humorous quirk of the carpenter, or a story of a stubborn log that refused to fit. Every mark told a tale, every corner had a memory. Even beyond family, longhouses were spaces of community. Neighbours would gather to help with construction, exchanging news, jokes, and sometimes heated debates about whose livestock had wandered too close to whose fields. Festivals, seasonal celebrations, and even solemn rituals were held within or around these walls. The longhouse was a witness to births, marriages, and farewells, each event etching its mark into the shared memory of the home. And so, the historical significance of longhouses was profound. They were not just buildings. They were living chronicles, repositories of culture, tradition, and memory. To step inside a Viking longhouse was to enter a world where every creaking timber and curling wisp of smoke spoke of resilience, ingenuity, and the gentle warmth of family life amidst the harsh northern elements. It was a home, a haven, and a story all at once, a story that began with wood and thatch, but grew to encompass laughter, labour, love, and legacy. As the smoke from the central hearth curled lazily toward the rafters, carrying the scent of roasted meats and smouldering pine, one could sense that the longhouse was more than a family's shelter. It was the very stage upon which Viking society played out its quiet dramas and subtle rituals. Beyond protecting against the icy winds and drenching rains, longhouses served as the nexus of social life. a place where the rhythm of everyday existence and the extraordinary events of Viking life intertwined seamlessly. In many ways, the Longhouse was the heart of the clan, a living map of relationships, responsibilities and reputation. The chief of the household, often a father or elder, would settle by the hearth, not merely to warm himself but to be at the centre of conversation, debate and decision-making. Here, discussions about trade, farming, hunting, or even the repair of the Longhouse itself would unfold with a calm intensity, punctuated occasionally by the laughter of children or the low grumble of an animal seeking its share of warmth. In this way, the Longhouse was a classroom, a council hall, and a gathering space rolled into one. Neighbours and extended family were frequent visitors. On market days or during seasonal gatherings, people would traverse muddy paths or frozen fields, carrying baskets, livestock, or news from distant fjords, knowing that the Longhouse would offer shelter and a warm meal. Inside, stories were swapped, some tinged with humour, like the tale of a goat that had attacked the chief's boots, and others carrying wisdom, warnings, or lessons from the outside world. The walls themselves seemed to absorb these stories, thickening the sense of continuity and belonging. Interestingly, longhouses were often designed to reflect their societal role. The larger and more elaborately constructed homes indicated the prominence of the family within the local community. A grand longhouse was not a boastful display of wealth, but a quiet signal of stability, skill, and responsibility. Villagers could read these subtle cues. The sturdiness of beams, the neatness of the hearth, or even the careful arrangement of sleeping areas, and understand the stature of the household in the larger social web. And sometimes, just sometimes, a crooked beam or a slightly lopsided roof would spark a teasing remark among friends, a gentle humour that reminded everyone that life, even in a structured society, could be delightfully imperfect. Festivals and gatherings brought the Longhouse to life in ways that contrasted sharply with the everyday routine. On special occasions, the home became a bustling hub, with tables laden with food, fires stoked higher, and music echoing from strings or drums. Elders would recount ancestral sagas, children would attempt to mimic heroic deeds, and the younger adults would practice the art of wit and conversation, sharpening skills that were just as important as those needed in the fields or on the seas. Even the simplest tasks, preparing a meal, tending animals, or repairing tools, took on a communal significance when everyone had a role to play, reinforcing bonds and weaving invisible threads of trust and collaboration. Thus, the Longhouse was a mirror of Viking society itself. It reflected hierarchy and equality, work and play, survival and celebration. The walls held echoes of laughter, arguments, whispered secrets, and raucous cheer. It was where a family nurtured its own, where neighbours became friends, and where lessons of life, humour, and resilience were learned and shared. The Longhouse was not merely a dwelling, it was the vessel of culture, the anchor of community, and the quiet stage upon which the daily extraordinary story of Viking society unfolded day after day, winter after winter. As the seasons shifted across the northern lands, so too did the Longhouses evolve, adapting to the subtle differences of each region. Imagine travelling through fjords dotted with pine trees, across open plains where the wind carried the scent of salt from distant seas, and over frozen rivers glinting like silver under the pale sun. In every corner the Vikings had learned to shape their homes to suit the landscape, the weather, and the needs of their families, all while maintaining the familiar warmth and heartbeat of the Longhouse. In coastal villages where the wind often howled like a restless wolf, and the rain could be relentless, longhouses were stout and low, with sharply pitched roofs that allowed snow and water to slide off with ease. These homes often included larger hearths for cooking and heating, and reinforced walls to keep out the biting gusts that seemed determined to sneak through any gap. The inhabitants of these coastal houses had a habit of laughing at the audacity of the wind, sometimes muttering to the rafters about the sneaky sea breezes that tried to steal their socks or hats. Life was harsh, yes, but humour was a warm companion, just like the fire. Inland, across rolling hills and forested valleys, longhouses tended to be longer, with extended sleeping and storage areas. Here, families often kept livestock like sheep, goats, or pigs under the same roof during the frigid winters, sharing warmth in ways both practical and oddly cosy. The floors might be strewn with straw, not just for the animals, but to soften the steps of children playing quietly by the hearth. And though the smell of hay mingled with cooking smoke could be strong, it was the scent of home, comforting and familiar. Families would joke about the aroma of prosperity, hinting that a house with more animals meant a house of plenty, even if the goats occasionally tried to nibble on the wooden beams. Further north, in harsher, snow-swept territories, longhouses were built with even thicker walls and smaller windows, designed to trap every ounce of heat. The roof beams were reinforced to bear heavy snow, and the interiors were arranged so that sleeping areas were clustered around the central fire. These homes often had smaller, more intimate spaces, and yet, despite the cold and the isolation, the longhouses became places of warmth and stories. Elders would tell tales of voyages and battles, punctuated by the soft laughter of children testing their skills with wooden swords, or daring to sneak a taste of the stew before it was fully cooked. Even among these regional variations, there was a common thread, a sense of identity and belonging. Every longhouse, whether perched on a windswept cliff, nestled in a quiet valley, or huddled along a frozen fjord, carried with it the same essence: protection, warmth, and a space for life's daily rituals. And despite the differences in shape, size, or timber choice, the walls of these homes seemed to share the same stories, whispers of resilience, cleverness, and subtle humour that ran through the Viking spirit. Through these variations, one could see how intimately the Vikings understood their environment. Their longhouses were living adaptations, blending practicality with culture, comfort with community. And in every timbered wall, every crack and knot, there was a gentle reminder. No matter the land, no matter the storm, a Viking longhouse was a home, a sanctuary, and a stage where life, laughter, and legacy could unfold in harmony with the world outside. If you step quietly into the world of the Vikings, past the curling smoke of the hearth and the laughter of children echoing off the walls, you begin to notice the very bones of their homes, the wood, the thatch, and the careful craftsmanship that turned simple materials into longhouses that could last generations. The choice of materials was never random. Each log, each beam, and every piece of thatch carried with it a story of survival, skill, and a quiet respect for the natural world. Wood was, of course, the backbone of every longhouse. Tall pines, sturdy oaks, and sometimes even birch were harvested from nearby forests, chosen for strength, straightness, and durability. Imagine the villagers in spring, axes in hand, listening to the satisfying thunk as a tree fell, and then laughing at the clumsy scramble to guide it to the sawyers without losing a boot or two in the mud. Once cut and shaped, these timbers were stacked like pieces of a giant puzzle, fitted together with precision that belied the rough appearance of the house. But wood alone was not enough. The Vikings had learned to combine materials in ingenious ways. Stones from the riverbeds formed sturdy foundations, keeping the wood safe from dampness and decay. Moss, a humble green friend from the forest floor, was tucked into gaps between logs, not just for insulation, but to keep out the smallest drafts. Occasionally, clever builders would even use animal hair or wool to line cracks, producing a subtle but surprisingly effective barrier against the cold. It was a patchwork of nature, a quilt of forest and field, woven carefully by hands that knew the value of every branch and leaf. The roofs too told a story. Thatch, made from reeds or straw, was layered thickly to shed rain and snow and to trap heat during the bitter winters. From the outside, the houses might have looked rough and simple, but up close, the meticulous work was obvious. Every straw tucked in place, every bundle tied just so. On windy days, villagers might tease each other about how the roof ate more straw than the barn, but beneath the humour was pride, a quiet satisfaction in creating a shelter that could defy nature itself. Inside, the walls often carried an extra touch of warmth or decoration. Animal hides were hung to block drafts or to add comfort to sleeping areas. Soft furs lined benches or floors, providing both practicality and a gentle luxury that softened the long, cold nights. Even small wooden carvings, simple yet meaningful, adorned posts or door frames, symbols of luck, protection, or family identity. A child might run past, tugging at a hanging ornament, and the adults would smile, not scold. After all, the house was alive with stories, and each hand, each touch added a new layer. And so, the use of wood and other materials was more than construction. It was a philosophy. Every element was chosen, shaped, and combined with care, balancing practicality with beauty, strength with comfort. The longhouse was a living thing built from the land yet shaped by human hands, where every crack, every knot in the wood, every tuft of moss told a tale of ingenuity, humour, and the enduring desire to make a house into a home. In the quiet glow of the hearth, with the scent of wood smoke and straw filling the air, one could almost hear the whisper of the forest itself, approving of the care with which the Vikings had built their world. As the villagers worked quietly under the grey northern sky, their axes and mallets moving in steady rhythm, the longhouse began to take shape not just as a shelter, but as a fortress against wind, snow, and the occasional curious goat. The construction of roofs and walls was more than a technical task. It was a careful dance between practicality, tradition, and a subtle touch of artistry, passed down through generations who had learned to read the language of wood, stone, and thatch. The walls were the first storytellers of the house. Thick logs, often interlocked at the corners in precise overlapping joints, provided strength and insulation. Every beam was chosen not just for its size, but for its grain and resilience. Villagers joked about the stubborn logs that refused to fit, calling them the rebels of the forest. But in truth, each resistant piece added character to the house, a reminder that nature always had its say. Moss and clay were tucked into gaps, sealing the home against draughts and curious insects, while creating a faint earthy aroma that mingled with the smoke from the hearth. One could almost hear the whispers of the trees approving, or perhaps laughing at, the humans attempting to bend their strength into a home. The roof, however, was the true crown of the longhouse. In coastal regions it was steeply pitched to shed rain and snow, while inland it might be more elongated, designed to cover sleeping areas and storage. Reeds, straw, or even turf were layered meticulously, with thick bundles tied together to ensure durability. Villagers often teased one another about who had stuffed the roof with just enough straw to feed a goat for a week, a small playful jest that lightened the heavy labour. These roofs were designed not just to protect, but to preserve warmth, trapping the heat from the central hearth and radiating it slowly through the interior, keeping the family and their animals cosy during the long, cold nights. Inside, walls were more than mere partitions. They guided the flow of daily life, dividing spaces for cooking, sleeping, and storage, while still leaving room for movement and interaction. Wooden pegs and beams doubled as shelves, hooks, and supports for hanging tools, furs, or dried herbs. Every notch and groove was functional, yet quietly elegant, as if the house itself were smiling at the cleverness of its inhabitants. Children would dart through these spaces, sometimes brushing against a hanging bundle of herbs, or accidentally loosening a peg, and the adults would only chuckle. Life in a longhouse was never entirely orderly, and perhaps it was better that way. The construction process was communal, bringing neighbours together in a quiet celebration of shared skill. Men and women lifted beams, hammered joints, and adjusted thatch while exchanging stories of storms survived, animals tamed, and amusing misadventures of the day. Laughter often echoed against the walls, blending with the sound of mallets striking timber, creating a rhythm as comforting as the crackling fire that would soon warm the interior. By the time the roof was complete and the walls stood tall, the longhouse had transformed from a collection of raw materials into a living, breathing home. Its walls strong yet welcoming, and its roof protective yet playful in its slight imperfections, reflected the careful balance the Vikings had mastered between nature and human ingenuity. Every house was unique, yet all shared the same essence: safety, warmth, and the quiet promise of stories, laughter, and life lived together under one roof, through every storm, every winter, and every cosy evening by the fire. Once the walls stood firm and the roof stretched proudly above, the longhouse was ready for the final touch. The careful arrangement of its interior, the quiet choreography of daily life that would unfold within those wooden walls. The Vikings, practical and thoughtful, understood that a house was not just a shelter, but a stage for every waking and sometimes sleepy moment of family life, work, and celebration. At the centre, the hearth dominated, a glowing heart around which everything else revolved. It was more than a place to cook. It was a gathering spot, a source of warmth, and the silent witness to conversations, laughter, and the occasional squabble over who had claimed the last piece of smoked fish. Around this central fire, benches and low platforms were arranged, allowing adults to sit and converse, while children sprawled on straw mats, their tiny hands tracing the cracks in the timber floor or pretending the hanging herbs were magical potions. The warmth from the fire spread gently, encouraging closeness, storytelling, and the occasional whispered joke about the ghost in the roof beam that only seemed to appear when someone dozed off too close to the flames. The sleeping areas were clustered toward the ends of the house, creating a sense of privacy while still keeping the family close. Beds were often simple, made from raised wooden frames covered with straw and furs, and sometimes divided by hanging cloth or animal hides. Even in this practicality, there was an artfulness, a gentle design that allowed each family member a small sense of personal space without separating them from the hum of life around the hearth. Young children might be placed near the adults, learning the rhythm of the day and night while drifting to sleep to the faint murmur of conversation and the soft crackle of fire. Storage was cleverly integrated into the layout. Wooden chests, shelves and hooks lined the walls, holding tools, cooking utensils, preserved foods, and sometimes small treasures or charms. Livestock, when kept indoors during the harsh winter months, were often tucked at one end, their warmth subtly blending with the human inhabitants to create a cosy, if slightly aromatic, atmosphere. The mixture of smoke, straw, and the faint scent of animals was not unpleasant. To the Vikings, it was the comforting aroma of survival, community, and home. Pathways were kept clear, though not rigidly. Children would weave between sleeping areas, adults would carry wood from one end to the other, and a goat or cat might weave into the dance, occasionally causing a muffled giggle or a gentle scolding. Every corner, every nook served a purpose, yet the arrangement never felt stiff or overly formal. It was a home designed to accommodate life in all its chaos, charm, and gentle unpredictability. Even walls and beams were functional, doubling as supports for hanging herbs, drying fish, or displaying carved symbols of luck and protection. Light from small windows or the open doorway fell softly across these surfaces, illuminating the textures of wood and straw, casting gentle shadows that danced with the firelight. It was a warm, living environment, a place where work, rest, learning, and laughter intertwined seamlessly. Through this interior layout and thoughtful division of space, the longhouse became more than wood and thatch. It was a carefully orchestrated stage for the daily performance of Viking life, where family bonds were nurtured, skills were honed, and stories were shared. Every corner had a purpose, every room whispered of warmth and safety, and every step taken inside was a step into a rhythm as comforting as the crackle of the central hearth itself. As dawn's pale light crept through the small windows of the longhouse, dusting the walls with gold and silver hues, the quiet rhythm of Viking life began to stir. Inside, the central hearth still glowed faintly from the night, a reminder of warmth and safety, and gradually the family awoke, each member stepping into a gentle routine honed by generations of experience and necessity. Life in a longhouse was never hurried, yet it moved with a steady rhythm, a dance of tasks, care, and shared moments. The day often began with the women of the household tending to the fire, coaxing it back to life, and preparing the first meal. The smell of porridge, grains, and occasionally smoked fish filled the air, blending with the earthy scent of timber and straw. Children rubbed their eyes, yawning and stretching, while learning from an early age to carry small bundles of wood or help grind grain. The routines were practical, yes, but also subtly playful. A child might sneak a piece of bread before it was cooked fully, only to be met with a quiet, affectionate scolding that carried more warmth than anger. Men typically moved from the hearth to the outer areas of the longhouse or the nearby fields, checking on livestock, repairing tools, or preparing for hunting trips. Yet, even in these practical duties, there was a rhythm and humour that punctuated their day. A goat might suddenly decide that a man's boot was the perfect snack, prompting laughter and mild frustration. The family learned to expect the unexpected, turning minor mischief into shared stories that would later echo softly through the timber walls in the evening. Midday brought shared tasks that often intertwined the entire household. Women might weave, mend clothing, or prepare hides for winter, while children practiced small chores, learning the intricate skills necessary for survival. Men returned with news from the village, updates on the weather, or tales of fishing and hunting, sometimes exaggerating a fish's size or the cleverness of a fox. Everyone had a role, and the routines encouraged cooperation, observation, and subtle instruction. Lessons were often wrapped in humour. Like a story of the day, a pig escaped its pen and turned the yard into a mudslide, leaving everyone laughing and covered in earth, yet richer in skill and memory. Evening routines were gentle and calm. As the hearth roared back to life, the family gathered, sharing a meal and recounting the events of the day. Shadows danced on the walls as firelight flickered, and soft laughter mingled with the low murmur of conversation. Elders shared stories from the past, teaching lessons through anecdotes, some serious and some delightfully absurd, like the tale of a neighbour who mistook a wolf for a lost dog. These moments were both practical and comforting, blending survival, education, and entertainment in a seamless, soothing rhythm. Before sleep, the longhouse quieted, though not entirely. The soft rustle of straw, the low hum of animals, and the occasional giggle of a child reluctant to drift off created a gentle lullaby. Daily routines had woven the day together. Tasks completed, lessons learned, laughter shared, and warmth preserved. Life in the longhouse was simple yet profound, a blend of work, care, and the small joys that made each day feel complete. The repetition, the rhythm, and the occasional humour became a soft, steady heartbeat, echoing through the timber walls and lulling every soul within toward rest, comfort, and dreams of tomorrow's rhythm. As the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, spilling soft gold across the longhouse, life quietly stirred within its walls. The day's rhythm unfolded naturally, each family member stepping into their roles with a gentle precision born of habit, necessity, and a touch of humour. In a Viking longhouse, tasks were never strictly divided by age or gender, though experience guided the hands and hearts of adults while curiosity shaped the efforts of children. Together, they wove the tapestry of daily life, balancing work, learning, and laughter in a harmonious, flowing rhythm. Adults began their tasks with purpose. Men often ventured outdoors to tend to livestock, check the condition of tools, or prepare for hunting and fishing expeditions. They carried the wisdom of generations in calloused hands and steady eyes, yet even they were not immune to small mishaps. A goat might decide that a boot or a sleeve looked appetizing, or a slippery stone would turn a routine walk into a precarious balancing act. Instead of frustration, these moments were met with quiet amusement, stories to retell later, and a lesson in patience, the very essence of life in the north. Women's work intertwined seamlessly with the household's survival. They maintained the central hearth, cooked meals, prepared hides, spun wool, and mended clothing. Some tasks required focus and care, like weaving patterns into fabric or curing meat for the winter, while others were more playful, like teaching children how to fold straw or craft small charms. Their laughter often echoed through the house, blending with the gentle crackle of the fire and the soft hum of wind outside, creating a comforting soundtrack to the day. Even the occasional dropped pot or burnt meal was taken in stride, often inspiring a teasing remark or shared chuckle that lightened the labour. Children, in their curiosity and boundless energy, had tasks suited to their strength and learning. They carried water, gathered firewood, helped feed animals, or swept the straw-covered floors. Alongside these chores, they absorbed lessons through observation, watching their elders mend nets, sharpen tools, or repair the walls, and through playful practice. A young child might mimic an adult's careful movements, wielding a tiny knife to carve wood under watchful eyes, while the adults offered encouragement, gentle corrections, or whispered jokes about becoming the bravest warrior in the kitchen. Together, these tasks created a rhythm that shaped the day. Work was punctuated with small joys, a child's triumphant discovery of a misplaced tool, the satisfying aroma of freshly baked bread, or the soft laughter of neighbours arriving with news or a loaf of rye. Even disagreements over who would carry the heaviest bundle of wood, or whose turn it was to clean the hearth, were handled with patience, humour, and negotiation, teaching lessons in cooperation and empathy. By evening, the longhouse hummed with the gentle satisfaction of a day well spent. Adults rested their muscles by the central hearth, sharing tales of the day's minor triumphs and mishaps, while children recounted their own small victories with animated gestures and bright eyes. The The shared work, the quiet lessons, and the gentle laughter strengthened bonds, knitting the family together as tightly as the wooden beams and moss-filled walls around them. Life in a longhouse was demanding, yes, but it was also rich with meaning, rhythm, and delight, where every task, big or small, became a thread in the enduring story of survival, learning, and warmth. As the day gently unfolded within the Viking longhouse, the central hearth cast a soft, flickering glow that highlighted the carefully arranged spaces for eating and resting. These areas were more than just functional. They were the heart of daily life, spaces where warmth, comfort, and community intertwined in a rhythm as steady and soothing as the crackle of firewood. Every plank of wood, every straw-filled mat, and every nook of the longhouse spoke of careful planning, practicality, and a subtle touch of the Vikings' quiet humour. Meals were always centred around the hearth, which served as both a source of warmth and a gathering point. Low wooden benches and raised platforms were arranged around the fire, creating cosy clusters where family members could sit together while cooking, sharing stories, or simply enjoying each other's presence. The aroma of stews simmering with grains, dried meats, and herbs mingled with the earthy scent of timber and moss, creating an atmosphere that was both nourishing and comforting. Children, always curious and mischievous, sometimes sneaked a taste of the food before it was ready, earning soft laughter and playful admonishments from parents, who secretly delighted in these small acts of rebellion. Eating was not just about nourishment, it was a social and educational ritual. Elders shared tales of distant voyages, heroic ancestors, and clever escapes, often spiced with humour or exaggerated details that caused a ripple of laughter. In these moments, the longhouse became a theatre, the hearth a stage, and every meal a gentle lesson in history, culture, and the subtle art of storytelling. Even the humblest porridge could inspire wonder when served with a story of a clever fox outwitting a village dog, or of a Viking who mistook a particularly stubborn goat for a rival, warrior. Resting areas, though simple, were carefully considered. Beds were raised wooden frames filled with straw and topped with furs for warmth, often clustered at the ends of the longhouse to preserve heat from the central hearth. These spaces offered privacy without isolating individuals from the life of the house. Children slept near adults, learning the rhythm of daily routines and the comforting cadence of voices and footsteps throughout the night. The soft rustle of straw and the occasional creak of timber created a gentle, soothing lullaby, blending seamlessly with the flickering firelight. The division between eating and resting areas was subtle yet purposeful. Storage chests, wooden pegs, and hanging hides helped delineate spaces, keeping tools, food, and personal belongings organised while maintaining the natural flow of the longhouse. Paths were left open for movement, allowing adults to fetch water, tend animals, or carry firewood without disturbing those resting nearby. Even in these practical arrangements, the Vikings found room for small touches of comfort and charm. A neatly folded fur here, a carved wooden ornament there, or a playful arrangement of herbs that added both fragrance and a gentle sense of life to the space. Together, the eating and resting areas created a balance between activity and calm, work and relaxation. They reflected the careful thought, resourcefulness, and gentle humour that defined life in the longhouse. Every meal eaten, every nap taken, every whispered story shared or soft chuckle released into the air contributed to the enduring warmth and vitality of the home. In this way, the spaces were more than just physical. They were the vessels of connection, comfort, and continuity, carrying the gentle heartbeat of the family through each day and night, season after season. In the heart of every Viking longhouse, the central hearth glowed like a small steady sun, its warmth spreading slowly through the timbered walls, softening the chill of the northern air. It was more than a place to cook. It was the centre of a life, the anchor around which family routines, stories, and laughter revolved. From the first flicker of dawn to the gentle quiet of dusk, the hearth dictated the rhythm of the day, offering both practical warmth and a sense of comfort that was almost magical in its constancy. The hearth was carefully tended, a responsibility shared among family members. Adults ensured the fire was strong enough to cook meals and provide heat, while children learned the art of adding wood without smothering the flames or sending a mischievous spark across the straw-covered floor. A dropped ember might prompt a surprised yelp, followed by laughter, as someone muttered about the fire's attempt to escape. Even these minor misadventures became part of the daily rhythm, blending practicality with subtle humour and teaching lessons in caution, patience, and care. Cooking was an art practiced with quiet dedication. Stews simmered in iron cauldrons, filling the house with rich, earthy aromas of grains, vegetables, and smoked meats. Bread baked slowly on flat stones near the hearth, while herbs hung nearby released gentle fragrances, infusing the air with warmth and life. The family moved around the fire with practiced ease. Someone stirred the pot, another chopped vegetables, a third carried water or firewood. Every movement was part of an intricate dance, ensuring that the house remained both functional and harmonious. Even a clumsy stumble or an accidental spill was met with quiet amusement and gentle teasing, as the Vikings understood that life, like fire, could never be fully tamed. The hearth also played a crucial role in keeping the longhouse warm during the long, dark winters. Its radiant heat reached every corner, providing comfort to sleeping children and livestock alike. Furs, straw, and wooden platforms were arranged strategically to maximize warmth, creating a cozy atmosphere that made even the harshest blizzards outside seem distant and unthreatening. The glow of the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating a gentle, soothing ambience that encouraged conversation, storytelling, and quiet reflection. Beyond warmth and cooking, the hearth served as a social and educational hub. Elders gathered by the fire to recount tales of distant voyages, heroic deeds, and clever tricks, blending entertainment with subtle lessons in wisdom, courage, and humour. Children listened intently, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames, occasionally laughing at the more amusing episodes, or quietly practicing the skills being described. Even small chores, like repairing tools or weaving baskets near the hearth, became shared moments of guidance and learning, reinforcing family bonds while keeping the rhythm of daily life uninterrupted. The fire, however, was not only a source of light, warmth, and nourishment. It was a quiet teacher of patience and respect. It required attention and care, reminding the family that even the simplest elements of life demanded mindfulness. Yet within this responsibility lay delight. The crackle of logs, the dance of sparks, and the comforting aroma of smoke and cooking food created a sensory symphony that was both calming and invigorating. It was the hearth that made a longhouse a home, transforming raw wood and stone into a space of warmth, safety, and gentle enchantment. In every Viking longhouse, the central hearth was more than a fixture. It was the beating heart of the household. It connected the family to the land, to their work, and to one another, providing sustenance, warmth, and a quiet stage for laughter, storytelling, and the subtle joys of daily life. Around its fire, life unfolded, steady and rhythmic, weaving together the practical, the comforting, and the delightfully human into a story that carried through generations. As winter's icy fingers crept across the fjords and forests, painting the world in shades of silver and white, the Viking longhouse became a sanctuary, a cosy refuge against the relentless cold. The longhouse was more than wood and thatch. It was a carefully designed haven where warmth, comfort, and survival intertwined. Inside, the family moved with a gentle rhythm, guided by centuries of experience and a few small tricks that made even the harshest winter nights bearable. The central hearth was, of course, the heart of this warmth. Flames danced and crackled, radiating gentle heat that reached every corner of the house. Adults tended the fire with careful precision, feeding it wood and adjusting stones or metal supports to ensure it burned steadily throughout the day. Children learned to carry small bundles of kindling, proud to contribute to the life-giving glow. Occasionally a spark would leap mischievously onto a stray straw, prompting a gasp followed by laughter and a quick pat of the hearth rug. An unspoken lesson that life and fire were both playful forces, requiring respect and attention. In addition to the fire, practical solutions abounded. Sleeping areas were arranged strategically around the hearth, often raised on wooden platforms layered with straw and thick furs. This elevated warmth not only kept feet and bodies comfortable, but also provided protection from drafts that crept along the timbered floor. Layers of clothing, made from wool, fur, and linen, were carefully donned and adjusted throughout the day, offering flexibility as temperatures shifted. Villagers sometimes joked about the mountains of furs they wore, but each layer was essential, a tactile reminder of the delicate balance between survival and comfort. Walls and windows were equally important, Logs were tightly interlocked, and moss or clay filled the gaps, creating natural insulation against biting winds. Small openings for light were carefully covered with wooden shutters or animal hides at night, trapping precious warmth inside. Even simple adjustments, like hanging thick fabrics across doorways or tucking extra straw beneath the floor, added layers of protection that turned the longhouse into a snug cocoon. The family had learned that a few clever measures could transform a freezing environment into a space of quiet comfort, where laughter and conversation flowed as freely as the warmth itself. Daily activities were adapted to conserve energy and maintain heat. Chores were clustered near the hearth whenever possible, allowing children to observe and learn while staying warm. Livestock, often housed at one end of the longhouse, contributed their own gentle body heat, blending with the fire's warmth in an almost magical way. Even small rituals like boiling water for tea or adding herbs to simmering stews became subtle acts of both nourishment and temperature control. Yet warmth was not only physical, it was social and emotional. Families huddled together in evenings, sharing stories, songs and laughter. Elders recounted adventures, occasionally exaggerating a misadventure with a goat or a mischievous child, eliciting quiet chuckles that mingled with the soft crackle of the fire. The communal presence, combined with practical measures, created a sense of security and comfort that no storm outside could disturb. Through careful planning, cooperation and centuries of accumulated knowledge, Viking families thrived even in the coldest months. The longhouse, with its layers of fire, furs, straw and love, became more than a structure. It became a warm embrace, a refuge where the rhythm of life continued steadily, softly and joyfully. In this gentle cocoon, winter's harshness was softened, and the family learned that warmth was not only about fire, but about togetherness, care, and the small, enduring joys that filled every corner of the home. Within the warm, smoky embrace of the Viking longhouse, the central hearth was not only a source of comfort, but the heart of culinary life. The smell of sizzling meats, simmering stews, and freshly baked bread drifted through the air, weaving a sensory tapestry that nourished both body and spirit. Cooking in a Viking home was a skill passed down through generations, blending practicality, ingenuity, and occasionally a dash of humour, as each family member played a role in turning simple ingredients into sustaining meals. Large iron cauldrons hung from hooks above the fire, gently swaying as the flames licked their sides. Stews, soups, and broths bubbled within, combining grains, vegetables, and smoked meats in flavours that were hearty and nourishing. Adults stirred the mixtures carefully, adding herbs and salt in measured amounts, all the while explaining to attentive children the reasons behind each ingredient. Too much salt, a parent might warn with a half smile, and the soup will sail straight to the ocean. Children would giggle, learning lessons about cooking while delighting in the tiny exaggerations that made daily chores entertaining. Flat stones placed near the edges of the fire served as griddles for bread and pancakes, allowing the Vikings to bake simple flatbreads that complemented their stews. Cooking surfaces were adapted creatively. Sometimes upside-down shields or shallow clay dishes acted as ovens, and every household seemed to have its own little tricks. A dropped pancake might provoke playful scolding, or a sly joke about feeding the fire spirits, turning a minor mishap into laughter and shared memory. Utensils, though rudimentary by modern standards, were ingeniously designed. Wooden spoons and ladles stirred thick mixtures, while iron knives carved meat with precision. Clay pots and wooden bowls held food for each family member, and simple wooden benches doubled as both seating and preparation surfaces. Even the youngest children could participate safely, mashing grains or helping carry small portions, learning both skill and responsibility in the process. The house hummed with activity, each movement blending necessity with rhythm, producing meals, comfort, and subtle joy. Preservation was another essential aspect of Viking cooking. Smoke from the hearth was used to cure meats and fish, while cool corners of the longhouse served as storage for dried grains and root vegetables. Herbs and seasonings were hung from beams to dry, releasing gentle fragrances that drifted through the home, enhancing both aroma and flavour. These methods were practical and poetic, a quiet testament to the Vikings' ingenuity and patience, ensuring that even long winters could be met with nourishing, flavourful meals. Cooking was also social, a time to share stories, teach lessons, and encourage curiosity. As food simmered, elders might recount tales of clever escapes, heroic deeds, or the day a goat stole the neighbour's loaf of bread. Children laughed, learning both the narrative of their ancestors and the gentle rhythm of daily life. In this way, cooking became a subtle but profound form of education, weaving together nourishment, tradition, and familial connection. Thus, the Longhouse kitchen was more than a place to prepare food. It was a centre of life, learning, and laughter. Every utensil, pot, and cauldron had its role. Every flick of the wrist or careful stir carried intention, and every small mishap became a story to remember. Here, amidst the warmth, smoke, and fragrant aromas, the Vikings demonstrated that cooking was not merely survival. It was an art, a ritual, and a quiet celebration of daily life, woven seamlessly into the enduring heartbeat of the Longhouse. As the seasons shifted across the northern lands, Viking families understood that survival depended not only on sturdy longhouses and roaring hearths, but also on clothing carefully adapted to the weather. From the first crisp winds of autumn to the biting cold of winter and the fleeting warmth of summer, every garment was both practical and a quiet expression of skill, ingenuity, and occasionally a touch of humour. In winter, layers were essential. Thick woolen tunics and leggings provided insulation, while furs, often from sheep, goats, or even bears, added warmth and comfort. Cloaks lined with fur draped over shoulders, shielding the wearer from wind and snow. The process of dressing became almost ritualistic, with children learning to layer garments properly, adjusting scarves and hoods, and occasionally stumbling under the weight of multiple coats. Adults would chuckle at the sight, teasing, "Careful, little one, or you'll topple like a snow-covered pine." Humour softened the labour of survival, turning a necessary chore into a shared moment of lightness. Spring and autumn brought their own challenges. Early mornings could be deceptively chilly, while afternoons warmed unexpectedly. The Vikings adapted by wearing lighter woolen layers, linen shirts and leggings, allowing flexibility and comfort. Boots were practical, sturdy, and often waterproofed with pitch or oil, keeping feet dry while navigating muddy paths or snowmelt. Gloves and hats, sometimes simple, sometimes elaborately woven, protected hands and heads from sudden gusts of cold wind. Even in transitional seasons, clothing was a careful balance of warmth, mobility, and clever adaptation. Summer, brief and fleeting in the north, allowed for lighter attire. Linen or thin wool tunics were common, offering breathability while still providing protection from the sun or sharp-edged branches in the forest. Feet were sometimes left bare within the household, though sturdy shoes or boots were necessary for work outdoors. The change in clothing brought a sense of relief and even playful mischief. Children might race barefoot across straw-covered floors, their laughter echoing through the longhouse, while adults shook their heads with affectionate amusement at their exuberance. Protection extended beyond simple warmth. Hoods, cloaks, and leggings shielded against wind, rain, and occasional frostbite. Leather belts and straps helped secure garments, keeping tools or small pouches close at hand. Simple adornments, like pins or brooches, served both functional and decorative purposes, fastening layers neatly while reflecting personal taste or family identity. Even small mistakes, like a scarf slipping off or a mitten turned inside out, could spark gentle humour, teaching children careful adjustment while lightening the monotony of routine. Clothing, like the longhouse itself, was a reflection of adaptability and respect for nature. It demonstrated the Vikings' understanding of their environment and their ability to thrive within it. Each garment, from the simplest linen shirt to the thickest fur-lined cloak, told a story of survival, craftsmanship, and thoughtful preparation. Beyond function, clothing also became a subtle expression of community, identity, and shared experience, a visual reminder that everyone in the longhouse was connected through practical knowledge, warmth, and care. By weaving together warmth, practicality, and subtle humour, Viking families turned the daily act of dressing into a ritual of protection and comfort. Every layer added a shield against the elements, every piece of clothing a testament to ingenuity, and every small adjustment a reminder of the gentle rhythm of life in a longhouse. Through careful preparation, observation, and shared knowledge, seasonal clothing became not only a safeguard against harsh weather, but a quiet, enduring thread in the tapestry of Viking daily life. In the quiet rhythm of Viking life, the creation of clothes and shoes was more than a simple task. It was a delicate blend of necessity, skill, and occasionally quiet amusement. Long before the chill of winter arrived, or the mud of spring settled into the floors of the longhouse, family members gathered their tools, hides, and fabrics to craft garments that would protect, warm, and accompany them through each season. The process was both practical and almost ritualistic, weaving together generations of knowledge with a soft, steady rhythm that echoed throughout the home. Women were often the principal artisans, carefully spinning wool into thread, weaving it into sturdy cloth and sewing tunics, leggings, and cloaks. The hum of the spindle, the gentle scratch of the needle through fabric, and the occasional soft giggle as a child tried to imitate the motions filled the longhouse with life. Children watched attentively, learning how to twist fibres, stitch seams, and even repair minor tears, all under the guidance of patient hands and quietly humorous commentary. "Careful," an elder might warn, "or that tunic will end up looking like a patchwork bear." Laughter followed, soft and warm, mingling with the gentle scents of wool, leather, and faint traces of dye. Leather was another essential material. Hides from cattle, sheep, or goats were cleaned, tanned, and softened through a careful process that could take days. Once supple, they were cut into simple shoes, belts, or protective outer garments. Each cut and stitch required precision, yet the Vikings infused their work with creativity, sometimes decorating shoes with subtle patterns or carving small designs into belts. The occasional mishap, a misaligned seam or an unusually stiff hide, was met with quiet humour as the makers improvised solutions or teased one another about their unique craftsmanship. Even errors became part of the story, creating memories and small lessons in patience and ingenuity. Children often contributed by gathering small tools, holding materials, or practicing simple stitches with scraps of cloth. These moments of learning were gentle and playful, a soft introduction to the practical skills they would one day master. Boys and girls alike were encouraged to experiment safely, discovering that even a crooked seam or a lopsided shoe could be improved with care, attention, and a little laughter. It was an education in responsibility, dexterity, and creativity, embedded within the comforting rhythm of the longhouse. Seasonal adjustments were always considered. Winter garments were layered, combining thick wool, linen, and fur for insulation, while summer clothing was lighter and more breathable. Shoes were similarly adapted, lined with wool in the cold months and made simpler for warmer seasons. Attention to detail ensured not only comfort but longevity, allowing families to use each garment and pair of shoes for years, repairing and reusing whenever possible. This careful stewardship reflected a deep understanding of materials, environment, and the rhythms of life itself. In this way, making clothes and shoes became a quiet, continuous thread in daily life. Each stitch, each cut, and each carefully measured measurement contributed to the family's survival, comfort, and well-being. The longhouse echoed with the sounds of creation, occasional laughter, and soft guidance, blending practicality with artistry, labour with learning, and necessity with gentle humour. By the end of the day, garments were ready, shoes were prepared, and the family could rest, clothed and protected, ready to face the rhythms of another day together. Within the warm and bustling walls of a Viking longhouse, organisation was both practical necessity and a quiet art form. Every family member had personal items, tools, clothing, small treasures and keepsakes that needed careful placement. The storage of these possessions was not merely about tidiness, it reflected the rhythm of life, the gentle order of daily routines, and the subtle interplay of functionality and comfort that made the longhouse a home. Wooden chests and boxes lined the walls, carved simply or sometimes adorned with modest designs. These containers held clothing, spare shoes, sewing materials, and treasured objects such as small charms or carved tokens. The lids were heavy enough to stay closed, keeping animals out, but light enough for children to lift under watchful eyes. A young hand attempting to open a chest might be met with a quiet chuckle and a gentle warning, "Careful, or you'll bury your fingers with the treasure." These moments, filled with humour and patience, became part of the family's rhythm, teaching lessons in care, responsibility, and respect for belongings. Hooks and pegs were another clever solution. Hanging garments, bags, or even dried herbs kept everyday items within reach while preventing clutter. The sight of coats, pouches, and bundles suspended neatly from walls created a sense of order, yet the arrangement never felt rigid. Children learned to hang their cloaks after school or chores, often competing quietly to see who could hang items most neatly, turning a simple task into a playful game. Even missteps, like a bag slipping to the floor, were handled with a light laugh and gentle correction, embedding subtle lessons in a comforting environment. Shelves carved into walls or built from spare planks offered additional storage. Wooden bowls, tools, and cooking utensils found their place on these surfaces, while small personal items like combs, beads, or writing implements were tucked carefully on higher shelves. The strategic placement of items ensured they were easily accessible yet safe from curious fingers or wandering animals. The family moved with an unspoken understanding of where each item belonged, a dance of order and care that kept the household flowing smoothly throughout the day. Even sleeping areas were adapted for storage. Straw-filled platforms or raised beds often had space underneath for personal items or spare furs. Lightweight bundles of clothing or linens could be stored neatly, ready for the next day, while heavier items like shoes or baskets were placed nearby but out of the way. This clever integration of storage and living space demonstrated the Vikings' skill in making every corner of the longhouse serve multiple purposes, blending practicality with subtle elegance. Small treasures, like family heirlooms, charms, or carved ornaments, were stored with particular care. These items carried both sentimental and symbolic value, connecting the present to ancestors and traditions. A child might peek inside a small chest, eyes wide with wonder, and be softly reminded of the stories and guidance those objects represented. Humour often accompanied these lessons. An adult might tease, don't take my lucky carving for a toy, or the spirits will be cross," blending reverence with gentle amusement. Through careful use of chests, hooks, shelves, and clever nooks, Viking families maintained order without rigidity. The storage of personal items reflected not only the practical needs of daily life, but also the quiet poetry of living thoughtfully. Each item had a place, each corner served a purpose, and each moment of tidying became a gentle ritual, reinforcing responsibility, care, and connection. The longhouse thrived as a living space, warm and organised, a home where possessions were respected, life flowed smoothly, and small moments of humour and guidance enriched the daily rhythm of family life. Within the sturdy walls of a Viking longhouse, life was shaped not only by warmth, food, and family, but also by the clever and careful use of handmade tools and equipment. Every hammer, knife, needle, or wooden implement was crafted with patience, skill, and an understanding of the land's resources. These tools were essential for daily survival, yet they were also objects of pride, each carrying the quiet story of creation and a touch of the maker's personality. Axes and adzes were vital for woodworking, carefully shaped from iron and attached to polished wooden handles. Villagers would sharpen them meticulously, and sometimes the youngest apprentices would watch in awe, fingers hovering hesitantly near the blade, earning gentle reminders, not too close, or the tool might take a bite out of you. Laughter often followed, soft and comforting, as children learned respect for the tools that shaped their world while embracing the rhythm of learning. Knives and awls were indispensable, used for preparing food, sewing hides, and carving small objects. Each cut or stitch required patience and attention, yet these implements were also versatile enough to allow small moments of playful experimentation. Children might carve little tokens or practice simple cuts under careful supervision, learning skill and precision while enjoying the tactile pleasure of wood and metal beneath their hands. Even mistakes were met with encouragement, humour, and gentle correction, reinforcing both safety and learning. Wooden tools, spoons, ladles, and bowls were carved and shaped by hand, often from the soft wood of birch or pine. Each piece was functional yet subtly beautiful, its curves and edges reflecting the maker's care and artistry. It was common for families to joke about who made the roundest bowl or the most crooked spoon, teasing one another with affectionate humour that kept daily labour light-hearted. These handmade items were used constantly, but they were also valued as expressions of creativity and skill, a reminder that survival could coexist with artistry and joy. Other equipment, such as fishing nets, baskets, and simple ploughs, were crafted from locally available materials like wood, reeds, and animal fibres. These tools were essential for gathering food and managing the land, and their maintenance became a communal task. Children often participated in minor repairs, like tying a loose strand or weaving a small basket, learning the subtle rhythm of creation while enjoying the satisfaction of seeing a tool restored to usefulness. Small mishaps, a frayed rope, a crooked stitch, were opportunities for laughter, problem-solving, and shared wisdom. Even the hearth itself relied on handmade implements. Iron hooks, tongs, and cauldron supports were carefully forged and shaped, each one contributing to the family's daily life and culinary success. Every tool had a place, and every use carried a lesson in balance, care, and appreciation. Together they created a subtle but constant rhythm, linking hands, minds, and generations in a shared dance of creativity and necessity. Through these handmade tools and equipment, the Longhouse thrived as a space of both survival and gentle artistry. Each object, from the largest axe to the tiniest carved spoon, told a story of resourcefulness, skill, and quiet humour. The Vikings understood that their lives were intertwined with their creations, and that mastery of these implements allowed both work and play to coexist harmoniously. In this way, the Longhouse became more than a shelter. It became a workshop, a classroom, and a home where every tool carried the legacy of careful hands and joyful learning. Within the warm, flickering glow of the Longhouse, life unfolded in steady, comforting rhythms, one of which was the gentle art of daily crafts. Weaving, woodworking, and other hands-on tasks were not simply chores. They were rituals that connected Vikings to their environment, to their ancestors, and to one another. These activities filled the Longhouse with quiet energy, soft laughter, and the satisfying rhythm of skill in motion. Weaving was a daily cornerstone for women and children. Fibres from wool or flax were spun into thread with rhythmic, almost hypnotic movements of the spindle. These threads were then woven into cloth, blankets, and simple garments, providing warmth and practicality while allowing room for creativity. Children often attempted to mimic these motions, producing comically uneven strands that earned gentle laughter and affectionate guidance. A future master weaver perhaps if the sheep don't escape first, a parent might joke, softening instruction with humour. Through weaving, lessons in patience, coordination and resourcefulness were imparted without a hint of pressure, carried instead in the steady, tactile rhythm of daily life. Woodworking was equally essential, practiced by adults and older children alike. Carving simple bowls, tools, or decorative pieces from birch and pine required focus and care. Yet it was also a source of playful experimentation. A child might attempt a miniature spoon only to discover a curious bend or chip, prompting a gentle chuckle and the reminder, the spoon isn't crooked, it's just creative. Over time, these small trials became skills, teaching precision, perseverance, and the quiet joy of transforming raw wood into something useful and beautiful. Other crafts filled the Longhouse with subtle textures and smells. Leatherwork transformed hides into shoes, belts, and protective garments, while simple basket weaving allowed storage solutions that were both functional and elegant. Herbs were sometimes braided for cooking or medicinal purposes, their aromas mingling with the earthy scent of wood and smoke, creating an atmosphere rich in sensory detail and soft comfort. Even minor mistakes, a frayed strand or a slightly uneven stitch, were embraced with gentle humour, encouraging creativity and learning rather than perfection. Daily crafts were not solitary endeavours. Families often worked side by side, passing materials, tools and advice, along with laughter and stories. The hum of spinning wheels, the tap-tap of carving tools, and the occasional burst of giggles created a quiet symphony of life, skill, and human warmth. Elders guided, children experimented, and everyone contributed, fostering a sense of shared purpose and connection. These crafts were simultaneously practical, educational, and subtly joyful, grounding each day in rhythm, routine, and gentle creativity. By engaging in weaving, woodworking, and other crafts, Viking families maintained both survival and culture. Each thread spun, each wood chip carved, and each stitch completed was a small story of care, ingenuity, and shared experience. The Longhouse became not only a shelter from the elements, but a living workshop where life, learning, and gentle amusement intertwined seamlessly. Through these daily crafts, Vikings nurtured not only their bodies with warmth and tools, but also their hearts with creativity, patience, and quiet delight, leaving a legacy woven into every object, every laugh, and every soft, flickering shadow in the longhouse. As the soft northern sun rose over the Viking village, the longhouse came alive with the quiet rhythm of daily labour, blending survival with gentle routines and occasional bursts of humour. Small trades and farming tasks were the backbone of Viking life, connecting the family to the land, to one another, and to the wider community. Though the work could be demanding, it was performed with a calm, steady rhythm, often punctuated by soft laughter and light-hearted teasing. Farming was essential. Men and women tended to small plots of grains, vegetables and herbs, rotating crops according to the seasons and soil conditions. Children often helped with planting seeds, watering or collecting herbs, learning the careful timing and subtle attention required to maintain the land. A mischievous goat might wander into the plot, nibbling at the tender shoots, prompting gentle scolding and a quiet chuckle. These small interruptions became stories, shared later over meals, reminding the family that even mistakes and minor mishaps could be woven into the day's rhythm with humour and patience. Animal care was another vital task. Livestock provided milk, meat, wool and leather, so feeding, cleaning and guiding them was a daily responsibility. Children learned to carry small buckets, refill water troughs, or lead animals into pens. Adults guided their hands patiently, sometimes teasing, sometimes praising, cultivating both skill and confidence. Even a stubborn cow or a playful pig could transform a mundane task into a moment of gentle amusement, blending work with the rhythm of daily life. Small trades complemented farming. Some family members crafted wooden tools, repaired household items, or worked on weaving and leather projects which could be exchanged with neighbours for goods or services. Villagers traded salt, wool, hides, or simple pottery, and the longhouse became a hub for planning, preparing, and occasionally delivering these goods. Children often accompanied adults on short trips to the village, learning the basics of trade and social interaction while observing subtle lessons in honesty, negotiation, and careful preparation. Even a misplaced basket or an upside-down loaf of bread could lead to laughter and learning, as mistakes were integrated into the rhythm of survival. Seasonal adjustments shaped the rhythm of work. Spring and summer focused on planting, repairing structures, and gathering resources, while autumn emphasized harvest, preservation, and preparation for the harsh northern winter. Winter was quieter, with indoor crafts, tool maintenance, and small repairs dominating daily life. This natural cycle allowed families to maintain balance, combining outdoor labour, indoor tasks, and moments of rest, always guided by the steady pulse of the longhouse hearth. Even simple tasks were accompanied by stories, guidance, and gentle amusement. An elder might recount a time when a plough broke mid-field or a goat cleverly escaped, eliciting laughter while embedding lessons in patience and resilience. These moments created subtle connections between generations, reinforcing values, skills, and the gentle rhythm of life that carried the family from one day to the next. Through small trades and farming tasks, Viking families maintained both survival and cohesion. Each chore, no matter how humble, became an opportunity for learning, bonding, and gentle humour. The longhouse, surrounded by tilled fields, livestock pens, and the bustling pulse of the village, thrived as a centre of life where work, care, and quiet joy intertwined seamlessly. In this rhythm, each day moved forward steadily, blending necessity with pleasure, labour with laughter, and survival with the enduring warmth of shared effort. In the Viking world, a longhouse was not only a place of shelter, work, and family, it was also a space of welcome. Hospitality was considered both a duty and a quiet joy, rooted in traditions that valued generosity and warmth, even in the harshest climates. To host a guest was to honour the bonds of community, to open one's hearth as a sign of trust, and to share not only food and drink but also laughter, stories, and comfort. When visitors arrived, whether weary travellers, neighbours, or distant kin, they were greeted at the doorway with warmth and respect. Shoes and cloaks, often damp from rain or dusted with snow, were removed, and guests were guided toward the central hearth. The flickering fire provided both literal warmth and symbolic welcome, wrapping newcomers in the comfort of home. Children, wide-eyed with curiosity, often peeked from corners, whispering softly about the strangers, earning gentle shushes from adults who reminded them with a smile that every guest was to be treated with dignity. Food and drink were central to Viking hospitality. A bowl of stew, a loaf of bread, or a mug of mead was quickly set before the guest, no matter how simple the household supplies. It was considered a point of pride that no visitor should leave hungry, and families often saved their best or freshest items for such occasions. The act of offering food carried a quiet joy, sometimes even a playful remark. "Eat heartily now, for the goats may have eaten half the garden already." Such humour softened formality, turning hospitality into a shared experience of warmth and laughter. Sleeping arrangements were offered generously. A guest might be given a spot on a straw bed, a pile of furs, or even a child's resting place for the night, while family members adjusted quietly around them. The Longhouse, already a space of adaptability, bent further to accommodate its visitors. Children, though perhaps reluctant to surrender their favourite sleeping spot, were soothed with promises of stories or reassurances that tomorrow everything would return to normal. This gentle rearranging of space reflected both flexibility and the deep-rooted tradition of care. Stories and conversation flowed freely around the fire. Guests were invited to share tales of their journeys, news from neighbouring villages, or stories of distant lands. In return, the hosts shared their own experiences, weaving together a tapestry of memory and imagination that lingered long after the fire had burned low. Gentle teasing often accompanied these exchanges. Boasts of bravery were met with playful exaggerations, and mistakes from past adventures were told with a twinkle in the eye. Humour bridged any distance, making strangers into friends and friends into family. Hospitality was not without a sense of sacred duty. The Vikings believed in the importance of honouring the gods through generosity, seeing kindness to guests as a reflection of divine favour. To mistreat a visitor was to invite misfortune, while a warm welcome was believed to bring blessings. This spiritual layer gave weight to every gesture, turning the act of sharing bread or offering shelter into something timeless and meaningful. In this way, the Longhouse became not only a home for its family, but also a beacon for travellers, neighbours, and kin. The crackle of the fire, the taste of simple meals, and the soft murmur of conversation created an atmosphere of connection and trust. Through hospitality, Viking families reminded themselves and others that survival in the northern lands was not only about enduring the cold or tending the fields, but also about nurturing bonds of kindness, laughter, and shared humanity. While daily life in a Viking longhouse followed steady rhythms of work, crafts, and quiet laughter, the year was also marked by special moments of joy, festivals and celebrations that lifted spirits, bound communities together, and filled the halls with music, feasting, and stories that lingered long after the last ember had faded from the hearth. These gatherings, rich in tradition and sprinkled with humour, were essential reminders that life was not only about survival, but also about joy, honour, and shared memory. Seasonal festivals aligned with the cycles of the land. The harvest feast was one of the most anticipated, a moment to gather the fruits of months of labour. Tables groaned beneath roasted meats, fresh bread, cheese, and mugs of ale or mead. Families shared food not only with their kin but with neighbours and guests, embodying generosity and gratitude. Children darted between tables, stealing bites of honey cakes when they thought no one was watching, only to be caught by a chuckling elder who would mutter, "The gods may forgive, but the baker will not." Such light-hearted scolding was all part of the joy, blending discipline with humour. Yule, the winter festival, was equally important. In the darkest days of the year, the Longhouse transformed into a place of light and warmth, its walls draped with greenery, its fire blazing bright against the northern cold. Families exchanged small gifts, shared tales of ancestors, and honoured the gods with offerings of food and drink. Candles flickered, shadows danced on the timber walls, and laughter rose above the howling winds outside. For a few precious days, the hardships of winter seemed softened by joy, togetherness, and the reassuring glow of tradition. Other celebrations marked milestones: births, weddings, victories, or even safe returns from journeys abroad. Each carried its own customs, songs, and rituals, yet all were bound by the same spirit of communal joy. The Longhouse rang with the sound of stringed instruments, flutes, and drums, as music carried stories through melody and rhythm. Storytellers, with a twinkle in their eye, recited sagas that blended history with legend, often slipping in humorous exaggerations that drew chuckles and nods of recognition from their listeners. He was so tall, one might claim, that he had to bend at the knees just to fit through this very door. The audience, knowing the trick of the tale, laughed softly, savouring the warmth of both the story and the moment. Feasts were not only about food and drink, but also about connection. Villagers danced, sang, and competed in friendly contests of strength, wit, or endurance. Even children were drawn into games, their laughter ringing out like bells beneath the smoky rafters. Adults encouraged them with gentle smiles, sometimes joining in, proving that even the busiest farmer or most serious craftsman had room for a little silliness when the occasion called for it. These celebrations carried deeper meaning as well. They honoured the cycles of nature, the bonds of community, and the watchful presence of gods and ancestors. To participate in a festival was to reaffirm belonging, to family, to village, and to the wider world. The sharing of food, song and stories was more than merriment. It was a ritual of unity, weaving individuals into the collective fabric of Viking life. Thus, festivals and celebrations transformed the Longhouse from a simple dwelling into a place of magic and memory. For a few bright nights, worries of farming, crafts or survival melted away, replaced by laughter, dancing and the warmth of shared humanity. And when the fires finally dimmed and quiet returned, each person carried within them a lingering glow, the memory of joy, of kinship, and of a life not merely endured, but celebrated. As the day's work wound down and the last chores were finished, the Longhouse transformed into something softer, a place not just of labour and survival, but of imagination, melody, and gentle amusement. Evenings were the time when families and guests gathered near the central hearth, letting the crackle of the fire mix with the softer sounds of voices and instruments. In these quiet hours, storytelling, music and entertainment became as nourishing as food itself, weaving people together through shared laughter, wonder and warmth. Storytelling was the heart of Viking evenings. Elders with eyes that glimmered in the firelight told sagas of gods, heroes and distant journeys. Their voices rose and fell like waves, drawing listeners into tales where Thor's hammer cracked the sky, or where clever tricksters outwitted enemies twice their size. Children leaned forward, wide-eyed, clutching wool blankets, while adults smiled knowingly, recognizing old favourites. Sometimes a storyteller slipped in an exaggerated detail, claiming a fisherman pulled a whale from the sea with a thread of wool, sparking laughter and teasing remarks. This blend of myth and humour reminded listeners that stories were not only about truth, but also about joy. Music accompanied the tales, filling the Longhouse with melody. Stringed instruments like lyres and harps produced gentle tunes, while flutes carved from bone or wood added breathy notes that mingled with the smoky air. Drums provided rhythm, their steady beat grounding both songs and dances. Children sometimes joined in with makeshift instruments. 2 spoons clacked together or a pot banged with a stick, eliciting indulgent laughter from adults who marvelled at their enthusiasm, if not their rhythm. Even a slightly off-key song was welcomed, for the spirit of participation mattered far more than perfection. Entertainment also took the form of games and contests. Riddles were popular, testing wit and memory. A clever question might stump even the sharpest mind, leading to laughter when the answer was finally revealed. Strength contests, arm wrestling or tug-of-war with ropes, were held indoors during long winter nights with children eagerly cheering for their parents or siblings. Even small mishaps, like a chair tipping over mid-contest, became part of the evening's amusement, met with gentle laughter and a shrug. Dancing sometimes followed, though space inside the Longhouse was limited. Families swayed or clapped to the beat of a song, turning the smoky hall into a small stage of joy. Children often led the way, spinning clumsily, their feet slipping on the straw-covered floor, while adults joined with graceful or equally clumsy steps, depending on mood and mead. No one minded the stumbles. In fact, they became cherished moments, tiny reminders that joy could be found in imperfection. These evenings also strengthened community bonds. Guests and neighbours shared stories of their own, bringing news, jokes or songs from other villages. Each voice, each melody, added to the tapestry of connection, making the Longhouse not just a shelter, but a place of living memory. Entertainment softened differences, healed tensions, and reminded everyone that life was brighter when shared. Beneath the rafters darkened with smoke, Laughter, song and story mingled with the warmth of the hearth. These nightly rituals made the Longhouse more than a house of wood and earth. It was a sanctuary of imagination, where the hardships of the day faded into gentle joy. Through storytelling, music and entertainment, Viking families found rest not only for their bodies, but also for their spirits, carrying them into dreams as steady and comforting as the firelight itself. While evenings in the Longhouse were filled with stories and music, the days themselves carried lessons of a different kind. For Viking children, learning did not come from scrolls or dusty books, nor from sitting on benches while someone lectured endlessly about rules and numbers. Instead, their classroom was the Longhouse and the land around it, and their teachers were parents, grandparents, and even the occasional grumpy uncle who insisted he knew the proper way to chop firewood. Knowledge was passed on not through lectures but through daily tasks that were as ordinary as they were essential, and yet shaped children into capable adults, one chore at a time. The process began almost without notice. A child might first be given something small, perhaps fetching water from the wooden bucket or carrying a handful of firewood. Simple as it seemed, this little responsibility was the start of a larger education. Each act taught them patience, strength, and above all the understanding that every hand contributed to the survival of the family. Of course, mistakes happened. A child might spill water on their own feet, or drop a stick of wood into the hearth with a dramatic crash, earning a round of laughter and a gentle reminder to try again, but this time without burning the house down. Even these blunders were lessons, soft edges of practice shaping sharper skill. As they grew, the task grew with them. Boys and girls alike learned to tend animals, to milk goats or guide sheep from one patch of grass to another. They learned that goats were stubborn creatures, often walking in the opposite direction of where they were supposed to go, and that patience was just as valuable as strength. Children often returned home breathless and muddy, proudly declaring success while dragging along a goat that clearly had other plans. Parents watched with amusement, knowing that persistence was a skill their children would one day need far beyond the pastures. Inside the Longhouse, children watched their mothers, sisters and grandmothers spin wool, weave cloth, or prepare meals. At first they were only observers, their small fingers tracing patterns in the dust as they listened. Gradually they were invited to join in, perhaps holding a spindle or stirring a pot. There was always the chance of stirring too fast and sending soup splashing over the side, but this too was part of the lesson. With practice, movements became steadier, hands more skilled, and confidence stronger. The older children, especially teenagers, took on heavier responsibilities. Sons often followed their fathers or uncles to learn woodworking, blacksmithing, or even shipbuilding. They were taught how to shape wood so that it bent but did not break, how to hammer iron into useful tools, and how to mend broken equipment with clever fixes. Daughters, meanwhile, honed skills of weaving fine cloth, brewing ale, or managing the complex storage of food that ensured the family did not go hungry in winter. Each role was vital, and although roles could overlap, each child slowly found their strengths. Learning through daily tasks also built character. It was not just about how to churn butter or repair a fence, but about resilience, cooperation, and pride in a job well done. A child who had mastered a new skill, perhaps finally lighting a fire without too much smoke choking the Longhouse, beamed with joy, while family members offered encouragement, sometimes with a little teasing to keep humility intact. In this way, the Longhouse was both school and home, its walls echoing with small triumphs and playful mistakes that carried great weight in the shaping of a life. These lessons lingered long after childhood, preparing young Vikings for the challenges of adulthood, whether in farming, trading, or venturing out across unknown seas. The simple rhythm of daily tasks, repeated again and again, became the quiet heartbeat of learning, guiding each child toward a future where they too would pass on the same lessons to the next generation. As children grew older, their daily tasks slowly shifted into something more structured: training. In Viking society, boys and girls alike were prepared for the future, though their skills often reflected the roles expected of them within the Longhouse and the wider community. Yet, while their paths might differ, both shared the same foundation: the belief that every person had a role to play, and that survival depended on each individual carrying their weight. For boys, training often began outdoors, under the open skies. Fathers, uncles, or elder brothers guided them into the world of physical work and craftsmanship. A boy might start with learning how to chop wood, discovering quickly that if the axe didn't land squarely, the log would simply laugh at him and stay firmly in place. Then came farming tasks, ploughing the earth, planting seeds, and later harvesting. At times, he was taught to handle livestock, though most boys learned just as quickly that sheep were far less cooperative than humans. Patience and persistence became early lessons, as much a part of training as the work itself. As they grew older, boys were introduced to more specialised skills: woodworking, blacksmithing, and sometimes even shipbuilding. The smell of freshly cut timber, the clang of iron struck on an anvil, and the sweat of hard labour all became familiar. Under careful guidance, they learned how to carve a sturdy beam, mend a tool, or shape iron into nails and knives. Training was not just about strength, but precision and discipline. A careless mistake with a hammer could lead to more than just a sore thumb, as many an apprentice quickly discovered. And though the adults might chuckle at a clumsy swing, the lesson was always taken seriously. Meanwhile, girls were just as carefully trained, though their tasks often centred on managing the longhouse and preparing for the responsibilities of running a household. Spinning wool, weaving cloth, and sewing garments were all essential skills. A young girl might first be given a spindle, and a thread would break more times than it held, but practice made her hands steady. Weaving looms, which seemed impossibly large at first, became familiar over time, their clattering rhythm blending with the sounds of daily life. Each woven cloth was not just fabric, but warmth for the family, trade for goods, or preparation for a future dowry. Girls also learned to prepare meals, preserve food, and manage storage, tasks that demanded not only effort but sharp planning. A poorly sealed barrel of fish might spoil in the middle of winter, turning months of work into waste. So, training meant learning not only how to cook, but how to calculate, manage, and think ahead. Brewing ale, too, was an important skill, and though mistakes were sometimes made, an overly sour batch became a lesson in both patience and the art of balance. Yet, it would be a mistake to imagine that these roles were rigid and unchanging. Boys often learned domestic skills, especially when mothers needed an extra pair of hands, and girls sometimes took part in outdoor tasks. A girl who could herd animals or even handle a bow was respected, and a boy who could mend clothing or tend to cooking fires was not looked down upon. In a society where survival depended on cooperation, versatility was a strength. Training was also about character. Children were taught not only the mechanics of a skill, but the values that accompanied it: responsibility, perseverance, and humility. A boy who showed off too much after mending his first tool was quickly reminded that pride was useful only when balanced with effort. A girl who finished her first woven garment proudly showed it to the family, and though teasing might follow about the uneven edges, encouragement was always there too. In this way, training became a bridge between childhood and adulthood. It prepared boys and girls not just for work, but for life, in a world that demanded both resilience and cooperation. By the time they reached their teenage years, most Viking children had mastered enough skills to contribute fully to the household, carrying with them the knowledge that their efforts mattered, that their hands, their minds, and their determination were as much a part of the Longhouses' strength as the wooden beams above their heads. While daily tasks and training shaped Viking children's hands and habits, it was stories and tales that shaped their hearts and minds. In the glow of the Longhouse hearth, when the outside world was dark and the winds howled through the night, elders became the quiet teachers of values and wisdom. Their lessons did not come as lectures, but as sagas and myths, carried on the rhythm of a voice, embroidered with wonder, and sometimes sprinkled with humour to keep even the sleepiest child awake. These tales were not told for entertainment alone. Each one carried a raw thread of meaning, weaving together lessons about courage, loyalty, cleverness, or humility. A story about Thor might show the strength needed to protect the weak, while another about Loki revealed the dangers of trickery taken too far. Children leaned close, eyes wide, not only marvelling at gods and giants, but also quietly absorbing the morals tucked between the lines. One evening, for example, an elder might tell of a farmer who boasted too much of his harvest, bragging that he was greater than the gods themselves. Of course, in these tales, pride often ended poorly, the man's grain rotted, or storms ruined his fields. The moral was clear, even to the youngest listener. Arrogance brings downfall, while gratitude and humility keep fortune steady. Parents needed no stern lectures the next day. The tale had done its work, and children remembered it when boasting too loudly about who had caught the biggest fish or spun the straightest thread. Other stories taught the value of courage. A saga might describe a hero venturing into the unknown, facing fearsome creatures or treacherous seas. These stories weren't just about entertainment, they were mirrors of the Viking way of life, where exploration and danger were never far. Children listened closely, imagining themselves as brave warriors or wise shield maidens, quietly preparing for the challenges they too might one day face. The lesson was not that fear didn't exist, but that bravery was moving forward despite it. And then there were tales of wit, clever tricks and riddles that showed how intelligence could triumph where strength alone failed. A child, hearing of a hero who outsmarted a giant by using words instead of weapons, learned that brains were often as valuable as brawn. It was a comforting message, especially for the smaller ones who weren't yet strong enough to carry heavy wood or wrestle stubborn goats. The moral lessons weren't always heavy or serious. Some were gently humorous, pointing out the folly of greed or laziness with light-hearted exaggeration. A lazy farmer who tried to sleep through planting season only to find an empty field at harvest became a laughingstock in stories, his tale retold with chuckles and headshakes. Children giggled but also understood. Work done on time mattered, and the land rewarded those who respected it. Parents too used stories as subtle reminders. A child reluctant to share might hear a tale about a greedy man who hoarded food, only to find himself lonely and shunned when winter came. The moral settled in softly like snow on a roof, without the need for scolding. In this way, storytelling was both art and discipline, shaping behaviour while keeping the atmosphere warm and comforting. Through these sagas and parables, children were given a map of values, what it meant to be honourable, brave, generous or humble. The morals stayed with them long after the fire had burned low, whispered back in memory during daily tasks or hard times. So, the Longhouse, filled with smoke, laughter and song, was also filled with quiet wisdom. Within its walls, stories were not just tales of gods and heroes, but guiding stars, softly teaching each generation how to live. And as the flames flickered, children drifted to sleep with these lessons still echoing, carried gently into their dreams. Amid the bustle of daily work, the laughter of children, and the hum of evening stories, there was another quiet presence inside Viking longhouses: the gods. The Norse pantheon was never far from the minds of those who lived beneath timbered roofs, and while vast temples and sacred groves stood in certain places, most families expressed their devotion in humbler ways. Within the longhouse itself, small shrines or simple symbols often mark the bond between mortal life and divine power. These shrines were rarely grand. A wooden carving, perhaps no taller than a man's hand, might rest on a shelf, its features roughly shaped into the likeness of Thor, Odin, or Freya. Sometimes it was just a simple symbol, an amulet, a stone etched with runes, or even a hammer-shaped charm hung above the hearth. Yet to the family, these objects carried weight far beyond their size. They were reminders of protection, fertility, wisdom, and strength, woven into the rhythms of daily life. Most often, the hearth was the natural place for such symbols. The central fire was not only the heart of warmth and cooking, but also a link between people and gods. Placing a small carving nearby ensured that meals, gatherings, and even the telling of stories happened under divine watch. Families sometimes left small offerings here: a splash of ale, a piece of bread, or even a fragment of meat. Tokens of gratitude meant to keep the balance between humans and the unseen world. Children, curious as ever, would sometimes ask why their supper had to be shared with a god who never eats. Parents smiled and explained in patient tones that generosity to the gods ensured generosity from them in return. Different families favoured different deities. Farmers might honour Freya, asking for fertile fields and healthy livestock. Sailors or traders often displayed Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, carved into wood or worn on a cord, praying for protection on dangerous journeys. Freya's symbols appeared in households where love, beauty, and even the hope of good fortune were cherished. Odin, with his endless quest for wisdom, was honoured by those who valued knowledge and guidance. In this way, the small shrines reflected the priorities and hopes of each family, their faith tailored to the needs of daily life. The rituals around these shrines were simple but meaningful. A family might pause before a carving at the start of a meal, offering thanks. During times of hardship, illness, poor harvest, or harsh winters, extra offerings were made, sometimes with whispered prayers that carried both desperation and hope. And during celebrations or festivals, the shrines were decorated with flowers, greenery, or woven ribbons, transforming the small corner of the longhouse into something bright and festive. For children, these shrines also became a way of learning about their culture and beliefs. They listened to the stories of the gods told by their elders, then connected those tales to the carved figures and symbols around them. A boy gazing at a wooden hammer above the hearth could imagine Thor swinging it in the skies, protecting them from storms. A girl watching her mother place flowers near Freya's symbol might feel that love and beauty were tangible things, woven into everyday life. In this way, the shrines were not only religious but educational, grounding each generation in the values and myths of their people. Despite their simplicity, these small shrines gave the Longhouse a sense of sacredness. They were a reminder that the struggles and joys of human life were shared with higher powers, that the gods were never distant, but close, watching over hearth, home, and kin. And in the flickering light of the fire, as shadows danced across carved wood and etched stone, the presence of the divine felt as near as the crackle of the flames themselves. If the shrines and symbols inside the Longhouse served as gentle reminders of the gods, then the rituals performed around them gave those reminders life. Worship in Viking homes was not grand or formal like ceremonies in sacred groves or great feasts in temples. It was quieter, woven into the daily rhythm of family life. Inside the smoky, timbered hall, religion was less about spectacle and more about presence, about keeping the bond with the gods alive in the same way one tends a fire, steadily, carefully, without letting it go cold. The most common ritual was offering. Before a meal, a small portion of food or drink might be set aside at the hearth, presented to the gods with a murmur of thanks. A crust of bread, a drop of mead, or a few scraps of meat. All simple gifts that carried deep meaning. Children, curious and perhaps slightly hungry, often wondered aloud if the gods would really come down and nibble at their bread. The elders smiling would explain that it wasn't about the food itself but the spirit of giving. That generosity flowed both ways, and the gods protected those who honoured them. Seasonal changes brought larger household observances. At the start of winter, families might light special fires, offering prayers for warmth and endurance. In spring, seeds were blessed before planting, sometimes with a sprinkling of ale or milk over the soil brought inside. These rituals gave everyday work a sense of sacredness. Planting wasn't just labour, it was an act of hope, tied to Freya's blessings for fertile fields. Preparing for winter wasn't only survival, it was trusting Thor to keep storms at bay. Healing and protection also found their place in household worship. If someone fell ill, a family might lay charms or amulets near the sickbed, whispering prayers to Air, the goddess of healing. Mothers tied small tokens of Thor's hammer around their children's necks, not only as decoration, but as shields against misfortune. Sometimes prayers were less formal, simple words spoken into the smoky air, hopes offered up like sparks from the hearth. In these moments, faith wasn't lofty or distant, it was practical, intimate, and rooted in love. Daily life itself could become ritual. Spinning wool might begin with a soft invocation to Frigg, goddess of household wisdom, while carving wood for a new tool might carry a quiet word to Odin for guidance. Even laughter and storytelling around the fire had their sacred side, for many believed that joy itself was a gift worth honouring. In this way, worship was never separate from the household. It was part of it, stitched into every act like threads in a garment. Children learned through participation. A daughter might be asked to place flowers or greenery near a small shrine, while a son poured a little ale into the fire as an offering. These simple acts were lessons, teaching them that faith was not about grand speeches, but about small, steady gestures of respect. And if a child spilled the offering, or accidentally ate the piece of bread meant for the gods, the mistake was often met with laughter rather than scolding. After all, the gods too were thought to have a sense of humour. These rituals also brought families together, giving them shared moments of quiet connection. A whispered prayer at the hearth, a family gathered around to honour the turning of the seasons, a blessing spoken before journeys, all carried the weight of unity. In a world that was often uncertain, filled with harsh winters, poor harvests, or dangerous seas, these practices gave comfort. They reminded each member of the household that they were not alone, that their family stood together, guided and guarded by forces greater than themselves. And so, in the soft glow of firelight, worship in the Viking longhouse was neither loud nor distant. It was steady, woven into daily life, as ordinary and as vital as bread or warmth. Through these small rituals, the gods lived quietly among the people. Their presence felt not in thunder or lightning, but in the steady flame of a hearth, and the whispered prayers of those who gathered around it. Though the shrines and rituals within the longhouse seemed small, the influence of religion stretched far beyond the hearth. For Viking families, faith was not a separate activity to be carried out only at special times. It was a constant companion, shaping choices, guiding behaviour, and colouring the rhythm of daily life. In many ways, the gods were treated like unseen family members, always present, sometimes demanding, but often protective. From the moment the day began, beliefs guided actions. When a farmer stepped outside to check the fields, he might glance at the sky, silently acknowledging Thor for keeping storms away. When seeds were planted, families thought of Freyr, hoping for fertile soil. Even something as ordinary as baking bread carried spiritual undertones, for food itself was viewed as a blessing to be shared with both kin and gods. In this way, everyday work doubled as worship, and the line between the sacred and the ordinary blurred into one seamless fabric. Religious belief also shaped household values. Hospitality, for instance, was not just a courtesy. It was a sacred duty. Odin himself, so the stories told, often wandered the world disguised as a traveller, testing the kindness of strangers. A family who turned away a weary guest might unknowingly offend the Allfather, risking his disfavour. Thus, when a knock came at the longhouse door, even if food was scarce, a place by the fire and a portion of bread were offered. Children grew up understanding that generosity was not optional, but essential, tied as much to divine expectation as to human decency. Beliefs influenced discipline too. Parents did not need to lecture endlessly when a child acted with arrogance or selfishness. Instead, they retold stories of Loki's mischief or the downfall of proud kings who angered the gods. These tales provided both amusement and instruction, showing children how certain behaviours brought ruin. A careless boast about catching the biggest fish in the world was gently met with a raised eyebrow, and a reminder of how prideful mortals often met their end in sagas. In this way, morality was taught through myth, making the lessons both memorable and meaningful. Even practical matters, such as building or farming, carried spiritual weight. Before raising a new longhouse, some families placed a small sacrifice in the foundation, a token to ensure stability and blessing. Before voyages, sailors often sought omens, studying the flight of birds or the direction of the wind, believing these signs carried the gods' approval or warning. If an omen was unfavourable, a trip might be delayed no matter how urgent. Faith, in this way, acted as both compass and anchor, guiding decisions great and small. Seasons were marked not only by weather, but by religious rhythm. Winter was not just a cold endurance. It was the time for Yule, a celebration blending survival with worship, when families honoured gods for light returning after the darkness. Spring was more than planting. It was a sacred renewal, tied to fertility and growth. In this cycle, every part of the year was threaded with divine meaning, giving even hardship a sense of order and purpose. Children absorbed these influences naturally. They learned that spilling ale carelessly might be frowned upon because it wasted what could have been an offering. They noticed that arguments were sometimes settled with oaths sworn by Thor or before Odin, making truth a sacred responsibility. They saw that bravery was praised not only because it was useful, but because it was seen as living in harmony with the heroic spirit admired by gods and ancestors alike. In the end, religious belief in the Longhouse was not heavy or burdensome. It was steady, like the beat of a drum in the background of daily life. It shaped work, play, hospitality, and even humour, making every action feel connected to something larger. To the Vikings, living without honouring, the gods would have seemed as strange as living without fire or bread, and so faith was not a separate chapter of life, but the quiet ink that wrote every page. As we imagine the Viking longhouse, we cannot forget the great challenge that surrounded it: the cold. Winter in the north was not a gentle guest. It was a stern, uninvited ruler who stayed for months on end. Snow buried the world outside, icy winds howled against wooden walls, and the days grew so short that sunlight felt more like a rumour than a fact. Yet, remarkably, Viking families endured this season year after year, not merely surviving, but finding ways to live with a quiet resilience that almost seems impossible to us today. The longhouse itself was their greatest ally. Its thick wooden frame, insulated with turf and sometimes lined with animal hides, acted as a shield against the bitter winds. The roof, sloped low, helped snow slide off before it grew heavy enough to cause trouble. Inside, warmth was kept close and precious. The central hearth glowed with fire, sending flickers of light dancing across the smoke-darkened beams. Children often nestled near the flames, wrapped in wool blankets, while adults tended the embers carefully, knowing that letting the fire die down in the night could mean waking to a biting chill that pierced even the thickest clothing. But survival required more than architecture. It depended on preparation. Long before the first snow fell, families spent the warmer months gathering food, drying fish, salting meat, and storing grain in wooden chests. Winter was not the time for fresh harvests or long hunts. It was the time to rely on what had been carefully preserved. In this way, survival became an art of foresight. A family that prepared poorly would find their bowls emptier with each passing week, while a family that worked together in the autumn could eat with relative comfort when storms howled outside. Clothing was another secret weapon against the cold. Layer upon layer of wool, fur and leather provided insulation. Imagine a Viking farmer stepping outside into the snow. He might wear an undertunic of linen, a thick woolen cloak fastened with a brooch, and boots lined with sheepskin. Children too were bundled up, though not always willingly. Just as today, some probably wriggled and complained, only to be sternly reminded by their mothers that frostbite was far worse than a few extra layers of itchy wool. And of course, there was always that one uncle who insisted he was tougher than the cold and went outside without gloves, only to return sniffling and with frozen fingers, much to everyone's amusement. Inside the longhouse, survival was a shared effort. Families often slept close together, their bodies generating warmth like a natural blanket. Animals such as goats or cows were sometimes kept in the same structure, their breath and body heat adding to the warmth of the hall. Though it may sound unpleasant to us, it was practical, and in the deep of winter practicality often outweighed comfort. The crackling fire, the smell of wood smoke, the muffled snorts of animals, and the rhythmic breathing of a family bundled together created a kind of winter symphony that was strangely comforting. Still, the cold tested spirits as much as bodies. Long dark nights could make time feel heavy. This is where culture and imagination played a crucial role. Families told stories, sang songs and recited sagas to keep morale alive. The tales of gods, giants and distant heroes were more than entertainment. They were mental fire, keeping hope burning even when the sun seemed reluctant to return. And perhaps, tucked into these evenings, there was a quiet laughter when someone spilled ale, or when a child tried to mimic Thor's booming voice, only to sound more like a squeaky mouse. Through all of this, survival became a lesson in balance, preparation and patience, endurance and community. The cold was never truly defeated. It was respected, endured, and lived alongside. The Vikings understood that one could not fight nature and win, but one could adapt, bend, and endure until the snow melted and green returned to the earth. In that sense, surviving the harsh northern winter was not only about fire and food, it was about spirit. The longhouse, warm with firelight and filled with voices, became a beacon against the endless frost, proving that even in the coldest places human resilience could burn brighter than the winter winds. Of course, while the longhouse protected its people from the biting winds and drifting snow, it could not keep away every danger. Illness, in many ways, was as great an enemy as the cold itself. Inside those wooden walls, where smoke lingered in the air and dozens of bodies shared the same space, sickness could spread quickly, moving silently from person to person. The common ailments of Viking families were often simple but stubborn. Coughs that rattled through the night, fevers that drained strength, aching joints from years of hard labour, and stomach pains when food had spoiled or been eaten too quickly. In the dampness of winter, colds and chest infections were especially common. A child with a runny nose might soon pass it to a sibling, then to a weary mother, and before long half the household would be sniffling, coughing, and praying for spring to arrive. But there were greater threats too. Wounds from farming tools, burns from the hearth fire, or cuts from daily work could become dangerous without proper treatment. Infections were not well understood, yet everyone knew the danger of a cut turning red and swollen. Some families relied on herbs, garlic, honey, or willow bark, believing they carried healing properties. Others turned to charms and prayers, asking the gods for protection against unseen forces. In the absence of doctors as we know them today, healing became a blend of practical remedies, old wisdom, and quiet faith. The longhouse, while a place of safety, could also be a trap when illness lingered. The same closeness that kept everyone warm also meant that air grew heavy with smoke and breath. Imagine a winter night. The hearth crackles, the walls hum with wind outside, and yet the air inside is thick and hazy, a constant reminder that lungs were working harder than they should. For someone already weak or elderly, this environment could be too much. Yet there was no alternative. The family could not live without fire, and so they accepted the risks as part of survival. Children were especially vulnerable. A fever that might be shrugged off by a strong adult could prove fatal for the very young. Parents must have watched anxiously over their little ones, trying remedies handed down through generations. Warm cloths placed on the forehead, bitter teas brewed from herbs, or soothing stories whispered in the hope that rest might bring recovery. And when the illness passed, the relief was immense, like a second sunrise after a long night. But the Vikings were not without resilience. Their strong diets, rich in fish, grains, meat and dairy, helped keep them healthier than some other peoples of their time. Daily physical work built hardy bodies, and the fresh northern air when they ventured outside strengthened lungs and spirits. Illness came, yes, but so too did recovery, often helped by sheer toughness and the will to carry on. There was also a spiritual side to health. Many believed that sickness could be the work of unseen forces, perhaps the will of the gods or mischievous spirits. In such times, small offerings might be placed at household shrines, bread for the gods, or ale spilled upon the floor as a sign of respect. Healing was as much about spirit as body, and faith gave comfort when herbs and poultices could not. And of course, even in the midst of worry, there was humour. Someone coughing too loudly at night might be teased for trying to outdo the hearth fire with their noise. An elder might declare, with a wry smile, that the best cure for a sore throat was more ale, though this remedy often led to cheerful laughter rather than actual healing. Illness, then, was a constant shadow in Viking life, yet it did not extinguish their spirit. Families endured it together, caring for one another with the same patience they gave to the cold and the dark. And in those long winters, the true strength of the Viking household was revealed, not in avoiding sickness altogether, but in the way they supported each other through it, with resilience, with faith, and sometimes with a touch of laughter in the firelight. Life inside a Viking longhouse may sound warm and communal, but let us not imagine it as always peaceful. When so many people, parents, children, grandparents, even animals, shared the same space day after day, it was only natural that tempers sometimes flared. Longhouses were as much places of laughter and love as they were of quarrels and disagreements, for family life, whether in the 9th century or today, has never been free of conflict. Picture the scene. The hearth glows, snow drifts outside, and yet inside the air grows thick not only with smoke but with frustration. Perhaps one brother believes he has done more than his share of the firewood chopping, while another claims the cooking is more important. A mother scolds her children for leaving muddy boots too close to the bed furs. An elder shakes his head at the noise of youngsters tumbling about when he's trying to rest. These were small sparks, everyday irritations, but in the tight quarters of a longhouse, even a spark could feel like a fire. There were larger disputes too. Property was precious. Every tool, cloak and animal meant survival, and disagreements about ownership were serious. Who owned the better axe? Who had rights to a certain patch of grazing land, or to the spoils of a hunt? Within a family, such matters could brew resentment, especially if one person felt slighted or overlooked. And because family honour was central to Viking culture, words spoken in anger could carry a weight that lasted far beyond the moment. Yet for all the tension, there was also a need for resolution. Longhouses were not large enough for grudges to fester without consequence. A sulking son or an angry uncle could not simply retreat to a private room. There were none. Instead, conflicts had to be aired, often in front of others, and resolved through talk, compromise, or occasionally a sharp word from the head of the household. The family's leader, usually the father or eldest male, though strong-willed mothers were by no means silent, played the role of peacemaker, ensuring quarrels did not grow into lasting divides. Some conflicts were soothed by humour. A sibling fight over chores might end when another family member teased them into laughter. A scolding from an elder, though stern at first, could soften with a joke about how even Odin himself couldn't keep children tidy. In this way, laughter was more than amusement. It was a balm, a reminder that life was too harsh outside the longhouse to waste energy fighting within it. Of course, not all disputes ended in smiles. Viking sagas tell us that grudges could be carried for years, even generations, when honour was at stake. But inside the family home, practical survival often won out over pride. A quarrel left unresolved could weaken the household, and in a world where winter pressed hard and enemies lurked beyond the village, weakness was a luxury no family could afford. Children watching these disputes learned important lessons. They saw that anger was natural, but also that unity was necessary. They watched as their parents argued over resources, then worked side by side the next morning, splitting wood or milking goats. In this way, even conflict became part of education, teaching resilience, patience, and the art of living together despite differences. And so, the Viking longhouse was not a place of endless harmony, but of real family life, with all its warmth and all its quarrels. Disputes arose like sudden gusts of wind against the walls, rattling the peace for a time. But just as the house itself stood strong through storms, so too did the family find ways to steady themselves, remembering that whatever their disagreements, they faced the same winter, the same hunger, and the same gods together. And so, dear listener, we gently close our journey through the timbered halls of the north, where fires glowed, voices lingered, and Viking families lived, loved, and endured together. We have walked through their longhouses, listened to the echoes of their laughter and quarrels, felt the warmth of their hearths, and glimpsed the quiet resilience that carried them through the cold. As the story settles, let your own thoughts grow quieter too. Imagine the snow falling softly outside a wooden roof, the flames within fading to a gentle glow, and the hush of night drawing its calm blanket across the land. Wherever you are now, may your night be just as still as theirs once was. Thank you for being here, for sharing this gentle journey of how Viking families lived in longhouses and more. If you feel the wish, you may subscribe, so that more soft stories might find you again, but only if it feels right, in your own time. And now, let the longhouse grow quiet, let the candle dim, and let sleep carry you, peacefully, into the night.